Morbid Facts, Part 988. From 2011 to 2013, Texas neurosurgeon Christopher Dunch turned routine spinal operations into disasters, leaving 33 of his 38 patients dead, paralyzed, or permanently maimed. Patients woke up unable to walk, suffering chronic pain, nerve damage, severed vocal cords, or life-threatening injuries after Dunch cut through healthy issues, operated on the wrong areas of the spine, and in some cases left surgical hardware improperly placed inside their bodies. During one surgery, a fellow surgeon reportedly had to physically stop him after he continued causing catastrophic damage to a patient's spine. Despite mounting complaints, multiple hospitals allowed him to simply resign rather than formally report him, enabling him to keep finding new jobs and patients. By the time his medical license was finally revoked, 2 patients were dead and dozens of others were left with life-altering injuries. He was later sentenced to life in prison for the repeated malpractice. This was the moment a diver tried to catch a crab and instantly regretted it. The diver used a pair of tongs to grab a smooth box crab on the seafloor, but before he could take her away, another crab emerged from the seabed and clamped onto her, refusing to let go. Smooth box crabs are known for protecting their partners. When danger appears, mates will often pick up their mates and carry them to safety, hiding them beneath the sand before attempting to defend them from whatever threat remains. Realizing he was watching a mate trying to protect his partner, the diver decided not to separate them. He even rewarded the loving pair with a piece of fish before swimming away. After a bird lost its ability to fly, its owner built a tiny transparent cabin beneath the drone so it could be carried through the air. Videos showed the bird riding inside the custom enclosure as the drone drifted off, allowing it to experience the sky again despite being unable to use its wings. In 2019, a man attempted to rob UFC fighter Poliana Viana while she waited for an Uber in Rio de Janeiro, but she quickly fought back, landing 2 punches and a kick before pinning him down with a rear naked choke until police arrived. The would-be robber was later taken into custody after receiving treatment for his injuries. Before playing Frenchie on The Boys, Tomer Capone spent years serving in the Israel Defense Forces, including during the 2006 Lebanon War. He's described taking part in night raids and checkpoint operations in the West Bank, where soldiers would enter homes in the dark, detain suspects, and confront civilians in tense and sometimes violent situations. Capone said years of exposure to violence, fear, and the constant pressure of military operations took a severe psychological toll, eventually culminating in a mental breakdown near the end of his service. Long before he became known for playing a troubled character haunted by his past, Capone was struggling with trauma from real-life experiences he said never fully left him. In 1999, 15-year-old ballet student Rachel Barber was one of Melbourne's most promising young dancers when one day she was lured away by her former babysitter, 19-year-old Carolyn Robertson. For years, Robertson had become obsessively fixated on Rachel, studying her face, copying her handwriting, and telling others she wished she could be her. After convincing Rachel to meet her alone, Robertson strangled the teenager to death and buried her body in a shallow grave in a forest outside of Melbourne. Investigators later uncovered journals revealing that Robertson's obsession had gone far beyond jealousy. She'd spent years fantasizing about taking Rachel's place and living the life she believed should have been hers. Robertson eventually pleaded guilty to murder and was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but she was released on parole in 2008 after serving about 9 years behind bars. In 2015, 18-year-old Narendra Kumar from India was rushed to a hospital after suffering severe weight loss, stomach pain, and a swollen abdomen. Doctors were stunned to discover that he'd been living for years with a rare condition called fetus in fetu, where a malformed parasitic twin becomes trapped inside the body of its sibling during development in the womb. Surgeons removed a partially formed mass weighing over 5 pounds that reportedly contained hair, teeth, bones, and structures resembling limbs. The undeveloped twin had survived inside Narendra's abdomen for 18 years by drawing blood from his body before it was finally removed during surgery. In 2021, 11-year-old Lainey Perdue became the sole survivor of a small plane crash in Tennessee after her father reportedly wrapped her in a tight bear hug as the aircraft went down. The crash killed her father, grandmother, and another relative, but rescuers found Lainey alive in the wreckage with serious injuries, almost entirely concentrated on the side of her body opposite of where her father had been sitting. Family members later said investigators believed his body absorbed much of the impact during the crash, likely saving her life. Steven Hillenburg, the legendary creator of SpongeBob SquarePants, was a former marine biology teacher who turned his love of ocean life into one of the most successful animated TV shows in history. But in 2017, he revealed he'd been diagnosed with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, a progressive neurodegenerative disease that slowly destroys the body's ability to move, speak, and eventually breathe. Hillenburg continued working on SpongeBob during his illness before dying in California in 2018 at the young age of 57. The character he created went on to outlive him, becoming one of the most recognizable animated figures in the world. Dutch artist and inventor Bart Jansen became known for turning dead animals into functioning drones after mounting motors and propellers onto taxidermied pets and wildlife. His most famous creation was Orville, a pet cat that was killed by a car and later transformed into a flying drone because Jansen said he wanted to give him a new life. He's also created drone versions of an ostrich, a shark, and several other animals, and later announced plans to build an airborne drone from a dead cow. Jansen says the projects are meant to blur the line between life, death, and technology. In 1994, pro wrestler Mick Foley was competing in Germany when a stunt went catastrophically wrong. While performing as Cactus Jack, his head became tangled in the ring ropes as he was thrown over the top rope. As his body fell toward the floor, the ropes violently tore part of his left ear from his head. A large section of his ear landed on the wrestling mat and was picked up by the ref, while Foley simply continued the match, initially unaware that something even happened to his ear. Surgeons later attempted to reattach it, but the procedure was unsuccessful, leaving him permanently disfigured. In 1932, outlaw Clyde Barrow was imprisoned at Texas's notorious Eastham prison farm, where inmates constantly endured brutal labor and violence. Desperate to avoid working in the fields, Barrow amputated 2 of his own toes, only to learn 6 days later that his mother had already secured his release. Barrow ended up walking with a permanent limp for the rest of his life as a result. While at the same prison, he was repeatedly sexually assaulted by another inmate and later retaliated by crushing the man's skull with a metal pipe, though a fellow prisoner serving life eventually claimed responsibility for the killing since he was a fan of Clyde's. Before becoming an actor, Danny DeVito worked as a beautician in New Jersey, where one of his regular clients suddenly died. Her family specifically requested him to prepare her for the funeral, asking him to wash, set, and style her hair inside the coffin. After that, he began taking on similar work at a local funeral home, styling the hair of corpses and helping present bodies for open casket viewings, before eventually leaving that world behind to study acting at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. In 1928 in Los Angeles, a woman named Christine Collins was reunited with a boy police claimed was her missing 9-year-old son, Walter. She immediately insisted the child definitely wasn't hers, pointing out physical differences and even dental records that clearly didn't match. But instead of investigating, authorities instantly accused her of being unstable and had her involuntarily committed to a mental asylum. Months later, it was revealed the boy was an imposter, and her real son was likely murdered by serial killer Gordon Northcott. The case exposed major police corruption and later inspired the 2008 film Changeling. So, where the hell is Savannah Guthrie's mom? Nancy Guthrie, the 84-year-old mother of Today Show host Savannah Guthrie, was last seen when her family dropped her off at her home in Arizona on the night of January 31st, 2026. By the following morning, she was gone. Concern quickly grew when she failed to show up for church on Sunday morning, something her friends described as highly out of character, prompting them to contact her family. Inside her home, her car, phone, and daily medication were all left behind, a detail investigators described as especially alarming, considering her limited mobility and reliance on those medications. Police stated she had no history of wandering, confusion, or cognitive decline, making it highly unlikely she would have left on her own, especially at night. Despite the apparent urgency of the situation, there were no publicly reported signs of forced entry or a struggle, only deepening the unease surrounding how she disappeared without a trace. Investigators later described the scene inside the home as very concerning, saying they believe she didn't leave voluntarily and that the case should be treated as a potential crime. Authorities have since collected DNA evidence, involved multiple agencies, and are reviewing tips and nearby surveillance footage, but as of now, no suspect or confirmed lead has been announced. This little girl was diagnosed with dementia before she even turned 4. When Sophia Scott was 3 years old, her parents noticed her speaking and development were going backwards. The day before her 4th birthday, doctors told her family she had Sanfilippo syndrome, a rare genetic disease that prevents the body from breaking down certain sugars, causing them to build up in the brain and slowly destroy the nervous system. They were told there was no treatment and that she was unlikely to survive past her teenage years. Sophia developed mostly normally at first, but around age 6, she began began to decline. Over time, she lost her speech, memory, and her ability to walk and care for herself. She later developed seizures, sleep apnea, scoliosis, bowel problems, and more than 30 different symptoms. Sanfilippo syndrome is often called childhood Alzheimer's, and most children begin showing symptoms between ages 1 and 4, usually dying in their teens. Now 15 years old, Sophia has lost much of her abilities. Her family continues searching for experimental treatment, but doctors believe it may be too late to reverse the damage. In the final stages of this disease, the brain forgets how to control basic functions like swallowing and breathing, and most patients die from complications such as pneumonia, respiratory failure, or cardiac arrest. Comedy legend Artie Lang survived one of the most self-destructive spirals in modern celebrity. In January of 2010, after years of severe heroin addiction, he stabbed himself multiple times in the abdomen inside his Hoboken apartment, collapsing from internal bleeding and barely surviving emergency surgery. His addiction later led to overdoses, constant arrests, homelessness, and the collapse of his nasal septum as a result of long-term cocaine abuse, permanently disfiguring his face. Thankfully, in recent years, Lang has said he's sober, lives mostly out of the spotlight, and prioritizes stability and health over returning to fame. In 2007, Shelley Miscavige, the wife of Scientology leader David Miscavige, and once one of the organization's most powerful figures, attended her father's funeral and then completely vanished from public view. She's not been seen, photographed, or heard from publicly ever since. In 2013, actress and Scientology defector Leah Remini filed a missing persons report, prompting the LAPD to state they had located Shelley and confirmed she was alive and safe, though no evidence, images, or details were released, and no independent verification has ever occurred. Former Scientology members allege she was removed from leadership and confined to a secret church facility due to internal conflicts with David, claims which the organization vehemently denies, leaving her disappearance unresolved nearly 2 decades later. The Scourged Back is an 1863 photograph of an escaped enslaved man named Peter, also known as Gordon, taken after he reached a Union Army camp during the American Civil War. The image shows his back covered in thick keloid scars caused by repeated brutal whippings while enslaved on a Louisiana plantation. The scars were the result of agonizing abuse severe enough to permanently disfigure his skin. When the photograph was published and widely circulated in northern newspapers, it provided undeniable visual proof of the physical cruelty of slavery and became one of the most powerful abolitionist images of the 19th century. Brazilian girl Helena Valera was kidnapped as a child in the 1930s by members of the Yanomami, an isolated indigenous group living deep in the Amazon rainforest. She spent more than 20 years living among them, where she endured repeated violence, forced marriages, sexual abuse, and the killing of her children during tribal conflicts. After escaping back to Western society in 1956, she struggled to reintegrate and was treated as an outsider, never fully belonging to either world. Haunted by trauma, yet emotionally tied to the only life she truly knew, Valero eventually chose to return to live with indigenous tribes in the Amazon, remaining there until her death in 2003, a rare and unsettling case of someone voluntarily returning to a society that once abducted them. In 1957, 2 young sisters in England, Joanna and Jacqueline Pollock, were killed instantly when a speeding car suddenly struck them during their walk to church. Their parents were shattered by the loss, but a year later they had twin daughters, Jillian and Jennifer, who as they grew began showing strange overlaps with the former girls' lives, recognizing toys they'd never seen, describing places they'd never visited, and developing an intense fear of cars. Jennifer was reportedly even born with birthmarks in the same locations as Jacqueline's. The memories eventually faded, but the Pollock twins became one of the most cited cases in discussions of childhood reincarnation, with some people believing it was true reincarnation, and others arguing it was grief, suggestion, or outright coincidence. A 6-year-old boy from Missouri was subjected to a staged kidnapping orchestrated by his own family to teach him a lesson about stranger danger. Police say an aunt's coworker lured him into a truck, told him he'd never see his mother again, and threatened to nail him to the wall of a shed. When he started sobbing, the man showed him a handgun and ordered him to stop crying. Investigators say he tied the boy's hands and feet, covered his face, and drove him around for hours while the child begged to go home. Once back at the house, relatives brought him into the basement and kept the act going, lecturing him about strangers while he was still terrified and restrained. Multiple adults were later charged after authorities said the ordeal caused genuine trauma, inflicted by the very people meant to protect him. During World War II, Nazi SS units carried out one of the regime's most disturbing programs, the mass kidnapping of up to 200,000 Polish children for forced Germanization. After being taken from their families, the children were sent to SS-run children's education camps where they were subjected to horrific racial selection exams. SS doctors measured their skulls, noses, eye colors, and body proportions, trying to determine whether each child looked Aryan enough to be turned into a German. If a child passed the test, they were renamed, stripped of their identity, and adopted into German families as if they'd never been Polish at all. But if they failed, their fate was much darker. Many were transported to concentration camps, where countless children died from starvation, disease, abuse, or execution. Only an estimated 10 to 15% of the kidnapped children were ever found and returned to Poland after the war. At the Nuremberg trials, the Allies confirmed the program a form of genocide, the deliberate attempt to erase an entire population by stealing and remaking their children. During King Leopold II's personal rule over the Congo Free State, forced labor and terror were used to extract rubber for profit. When workers failed to meet rubber quotas, punishment was systematic and brutal, with hands or entire limbs cut off as a warning. Soldiers often mutilated or killed the workers' wives and children as well, using family terror to force compliance from entire families. The regime led to the deaths of millions through execution, starvation, disease, and torture, making it one of the most horrific colonial atrocities in history. In 2004, a massive fire broke out at the Yacuwa Bolaño supermarket in Paraguay during a busy shopping day. As smoke and flames spread, multiple exits were reportedly locked to prevent customers from fleeing with unpaid merchandise, trapping hundreds of people inside. The fire ended up killing more than 400 people, many from smoke inhalation while pressed against sealed doors. Investigators later confirmed severe safety violations, and several owners and employees were convicted, making it one of the deadliest fires in history and a stark example of profit being prioritized over human life. This haunting photo shows an early radiation therapy session from the 1930s, when doctors used x-rays to burn away skin diseases or tumors with terrifyingly primitive equipment. The patient's head was clamped perfectly still so doctors could fire high-dose radiation at specific areas of the face. Because the dangers of radiation were barely understood, patients often suffered brutal side effects, severe burns, scarring, hair loss, blindness, and even cancer years later. In some cases, radiation was even used to treat acne or blemishes, causing far more damage than the condition itself. In May of 1973, a man walked into a bank in Ontario with a rifle and a bomb wired inside his own mouth. The device was connected to a dead man's switch, meaning if he released the pressure or was killed, it would immediately explode. He calmly took hostages and demanded money, claiming there was another larger bomb hidden inside the bank. When he tried to leave the building with a bag of cash, police snipers opened fire. The moment he was hit, the switch released, detonating the bomb in his mouth and blowing up his head and upper body in front of everyone. Investigators later found a second device inside the bank containing 200 sticks of dynamite that could have wiped out the entire building, but it was luckily diffused. The man carried several fake IDs and was so badly mutilated that he's never been identified. Here's some extremely rare footage of a pilot flying straight into the eye of Hurricane Melissa. The eye forms when a hurricane becomes powerful enough to organize itself. A calm circular zone in the center where air actually sinks instead of rising. While the surrounding eye wall is a violent ring of wind and rain, the eye can be eerily clear and still, sometimes even letting sunlight through. This is the only known footage of the extremely rare box jellyfish known as Chirodectes. Captured off the coast of Papua New Guinea, this was only the second ever sighting of the species in recorded history. Draining glyphosate into a container looks like a glitch in the Matrix, but it's actually a laminar flow effect, where the liquid moves so smoothly it appears frozen in place. Here's some extremely rare footage of a snow leopard caught on a trail cam in the wild. These elusive predators are known as the ghosts of the mountains for a reason. So few humans ever catch a glimpse of them that even wildlife experts can spend years tracking one without success. They live high in the remote peaks of Central Asia, blending in perfectly with the jagged, icy terrain, where temperatures often plummet below zero and oxygen is scarce. Their thick, spotted coats act as camouflage against the rocks and snow, making them nearly invisible even when they're just a few feet away. Pop icon Britney Spears has lived through one of the most disturbing public downfalls in modern celebrity history. After a 2007 breakdown that saw her shave her head and attack a paparazzi's car, she was placed under an involuntary psychiatric hold, and shortly after, Her father gained full control of her life through a conservatorship that lasted 13 years. During that time, Brittany claims she was drugged, forced into rehab, and even denied basic freedoms like driving, marriage, or spending her own money. Even after regaining her freedom in 2021, Brittany has described the trauma as something that crushed her soul, leaving her forever haunted by the years she spent as a prisoner of her own fame. This driver was extremely lucky they lived in Australia, where cars are right-hand drive. At just 9 years old, Louis Joseph Xavier, the oldest son of King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, suffered a fatal injury after a fall. He admitted he'd been pushed but refused to name the culprit, afraid they'd be punished. The wound became infected and he died in agony soon after, but never ratted on his friend. His death shattered his parents. Both would be executed just 2 years later, as the monarchy he was meant to inherit completely crumbled. 18-year-old Kylie Montero thought she was starting her future, newly graduated, 11 weeks pregnant, and dreaming of naming her baby girl Eleanor. But instead, she walked straight into a nightmare. Her boyfriend, 22-year-old Gregory Groom, had a violent history she tried to escape, even hiding in a domestic abuse shelter for 3 weeks. But like too many victims before her, she went back hoping he'd change. On August 6, 2025, during a late-night visit to his house, an argument turned terrifying when Gregory threw her to the ground, pulled her hair, and started strangling her. Knowing something was seriously wrong, she sent one last chilling text to her sister. "My phone is at 4%. If I die, it was Greg." Moments later, he reportedly stabbed her in the neck and chest, killing not just Kylie, but also the unborn child she was excited to raise. Instead of calling for help, he spent hours digging a grave in his own backyard, and around sunrise, he shoved her body into the shallow hole like trash. For 13 days, Kylie's family begged for answers while Gregory acted innocent, until police finally found her buried behind his house. He was arrested and has pleaded not guilty.